Okay, just before we leave step 8 and our whole trifecta of sorting, filtering, and paging, I have a couple of things that I would call it sort of bonus material. There is not a enumeration you need to filter by in your music just yet, at least, right? So it's not something applicable to your project work in particular, but I did have a student asking about this, so I wanted to share this information. What if you want to filter on an enumerated value? So remember that in our models right now, in the medical office example, we have this coverage enumeration, right? So let's say we wanted to add a filter to just see all the out of province, okay, patients and things like that. How would we do that? Well, it's a little bit tricky with an enumerator making a proper select list unless you're willing to accept just the enumerated values, right? So I'm actually going to share with you this idea. I'm going to add it into the utilities folder. So we're going to add this little bit of a utility class. Once more, not surprisingly, it's a static class. I'm going to call it Enum extensions. Okay. So the idea here, okay, is we're going to be able to return a select list, right? But we have to prepare the values in a certain way. The trickier part with an enumeration is the fact that some of the values might have display attributes. And if they do, we want to use that instead of the name of the enumerated item itself, right? So that's where all this extra code is coming in. So basically we get values from the enum, okay? And then we need to select new values where we get the text from, depending on whether it has display attribute, okay? Then we use the display name, right? Otherwise, we just use the name of the item itself. So that's what this is really doing. It's deciding, hey, do we have a display name? If we do, use it. Otherwise, use the name of the enum itself, right? And we build up our list that way. So then we can return the new select list with those values, okay? And we'll also be able to store the selected value. So that's very important, as we know, for a select control. If the user has previously selected a value, we want to retain that one as well. All right. So now, how do we use this in the actual controller? Well, let's go to the patient index action, okay? We need to add a parameter for this new option to filter by. So if we want to add filtering by coverage as well, right? Okay, again, this is not a default one, so I'll maybe go like this. Oh. Okay. Nullable string for my coverage filter, okay, is for my filter for what kind of medical coverage they have, right? Now, down here, this is where we're preparing all the other select lists. We call popular drop-down list. Then we made our own select list here for conditions, right? So you could filter for everyone who has a certain medical condition in their history. So we're going to put code here to get us our select list for our coverage, right? So I'll put it right underneath the other two, okay? Select list for the coverage enum, okay? So we basically have an if-else, because we have to handle what if there is a currently selected value, right? Because we're going to call our toSelectList method, okay? Depending on whether we need to select one that was already chosen by the user, or null if nothing has been selected. Okay. Then, of course, we have to add another if to our series of tests here to decide, are we adding a where clause or not, right? So right here, I'll add yet another if. We'll check our coverage filter to see whether or not they've chosen an enumerated value to actually filter by. If they have, then we add patients where coverage matches our selected coverage. And that's it, except for the actual UI itself, right? So let's come down now to the index view for patient. So right up at the top here where we have our filter section, okay, I could rearrange things if I wanted to, add my new select, but you know, I found that it's probably best because right now we have our row, okay, here with 2, okay, the select by doctor, select by medical trial. Notice we gave that a little bit more width, and then we started a new row with our filter condition, filter for condition, the patient name, and our button, right? And that looked pretty good on the screen, arranged that way. Where are we going to add this new one that will make the whole thing still look pretty professional? Well, I basically decided to rearrange it this way, okay? And you can do your own approach if you prefer. Okay, so I've just rearranged it so in the first row here, right, with a width of 4, we'll have our select medical coverage. Width of 4, we'll select by doctor. And then we'll have our, again, width of 4, select by condition. So evenly spaced 3 filters across the top row, okay, and then in the next row, okay, with 4 for the patient name, 6 for the medical trial, and then our buttons, okay, to either submit or clear the filter, right? And I think that that works fairly well. Okay, so let's just actually see this up and running. We've added one more filter for an enumerated value. Coming to patients, when I click filter search, there we go. So even spacing across the top, right? Medical coverage, all coverage types, OHIP, out of province, or international. So if I just want to see out of province, there we go. I only have 1. But, you know, over time, there might be more and more. I can clear the filter quite easily and so on. But that's a decent arrangement, I think, for how it works. I want to, because those big, long names here, I want to give a little bit more room for the filter by medical trial, and this arrangement seemed to work. Okay. All right. Let me just clear this. Now, one thing you might have noticed, I have another little bit of a bonus chunk of code in here. So if you don't like this effect, that when you go to the last page, right, as you go through, it doesn't really happen until the last page, but you see the paging control is right up next to the data. No one asked yet this term, but I have had students ask in the past, wouldn't it be nice if you just glue the paging control to the bottom, right? So it always stays at the bottom of the screen. So like you'll see even more if I cut it down the page size, right? Yeah, it's staying right up there, snugging up to the data. But what if I always want it down here at the bottom for whatever reason? Well, it's easily done, okay? So I have an alternate arrangement here. I could show you the two little changes, but I'll probably mess it up as I often do. So I'm just going to come in here to the partial view, okay, for our paging navbar, right? I'm just going to add a bootstrap class to the actual nav itself, right? Fixed bottom, okay, just a little light background there. So that works good for fixing to the bottom, but I still want to make sure it's justified in the center. And to do that, I need to add yet another div around the rest of the content. So I'm going to go inside here, create a div, container fluid, justify content center, and then I'm going to wrap this div around the entire content of the nav itself. Okay. All right, so let's just see the difference now when I run. So the nav bar is fixed here in this bar at the bottom, okay? And it stays there, so if I go to the last page, it's still here, and away you go. Now, whether you want that or not is entirely, you know, a decision you might make with your client, but you notice that, you know, we can still scroll, and the nav bar stays at the bottom. If I change my page size down, right, then it stays there and is always in that spot on the screen. Now, it does mean, you know, that you have to have enough screen height to see it, right? That the window has to all be visible. But as long as you do, then it stays in its spot all the time. So it's entirely up to you which style you want to use. But As I said, it's a common question. I'm surprised no one's asked it yet, but probably somebody will at some point. So I thought I'd share that little bit of extra styling you can apply if you are after that, that look to your UI itself.